Chisa, the breaker of deadlocks, has finally arrived in the first half of version 2.8 as the patch's only new 5-star resonator, and she's here to shine with a sharp moveset, incredible team-wide buffs, and a surprising amount of damage. She's got a kit that appears absurdly complex at first glance, but she's got a simple rotation with plenty of space to provide additional utility for her teams. As a Havoc, liberation damage-focused support unit that heavily buffs negative statuses, she'll synergize best with units that use these effects like Ciaccona, Cartethyia, Phoebe, and Zani. With that, welcome to our full-scope, comprehensive guide to Chisa, the newest addition to Wuthering Waves, and I'm here to break down everything when it comes to how she works, what her best equipment will be, and the steps you need to take across her team building and rotations to make the most out of her insane buffing potential. As always, if you're enjoying this content, please hit that like and subscribe button. Chisa, with her baseline kit, focuses on building up her Forte circuit to transform her scissors into a giant chainsaw, dealing respectable damage to enemies, healing and shielding her team, while also giving them access to defense reduction and ignore to her targets. So this Forte circuit is where we'll begin. Chisa's Forte circuit is called Ring of Chainsaw, and there are plenty of ways to build up this resource. The first is simply Chisa's normal attack. Her basic attack is a 2-hit attack chain that can be followed up with Rending Lunge. Following up on this attack with a basic attack on the ground will trigger Death Snip, which deals resonance liberation damage and heals the team. She can attack during this skill to deal additional damage. When she uses Rending Lunge in the air, she can follow up with a normal attack to use Hanging Finality. This attack plunges her to the ground and can be followed up with Death Snip. Death Snip can also be followed up with another attack to cast Thread Withdrawn, which can trigger dodges after it's cast. Chisa's heavy attack leaps into the air and attacks the target. Pressing a normal attack allows her to follow up with Hanging Finality, while holding the attack performs Severed Facet. Severed Facet deals damage and can be followed up with Hanging Finality as well, and if interrupted, you can cast it again by holding a normal attack before landing. Her plunge attack, on the other hand, simply deals havoc damage and can be followed up with a second hit of her basic attack chain. Her baseline dodge counter simply attacks the target after a dodge and can be followed up with Rending Lunge. Chisa can also hold dodge after a dodge counter to cast Eye of Unraveling Retraction. This attack stagnates the target and can be followed up with Rending Lunge. That's one of the most complicated normal attacks in the game, but Chisa still has more ways to build up her Forte. The next is her Resonance skill. Her baseline skill, Eye of Unraveling, damages and stagnates the target and can be followed up with Rending Lunge. Her intro skill also generates 1/5 of her Forte circuit after being cast, and additionally allows her to chain into the second hit of her basic attack chain. The last method to generate a Ring of Chainsaw is Chisa's Liberation. This ability deals damage, heals every teammate, and can be followed up with her second basic attack while also being usable in the air. The ability also gives Chisa a special buff called Woven Myriad. This buff gives Chisa a 120% damage multiplier on all of her attacks in Chainsaw mode. So let's break down what this mode actually is. When Chisa's Ring of Chainsaw is filled, she gains an enhanced resonance skill called Serrated Loop. This attack deals damage, stagnates, and pulls in targets, and can be held in to continuously attack and pull in those targets. And if pressed, she can follow up with the second hit of her Chainsaw attack chain, but if held, she uses the first. So let's talk about that attack chain, which consists of up to 3 consecutive attacks. You can press normal attack to start from stage 1, or hold it to start from stage 2. Stage 2 can be held to continuously attack the target, and releasing the attack button or dodging during this attack will trigger Discordance, which can also trigger dodges afterwards. This attack can also be followed up with stage 3, which can also be held down or released to trigger Fall Tone. All of her Chainsaw attacks are considered liberation damage and consume her Forte on hit. For dodge counters, she can also hold down the attack button during this cast. This attack will then be followed up with the third hit of her basic attack chain, and if you release the button or dodge during this counter, you can trigger Discordance. The last attack Chisa has access to in Chainsaw mode is Eradication. This ability can be manually cast with a basic attack following Fall Tone, or by using an attack after she fully consumes her entire Forte circuit. This attack deals massive liberation damage and also shields the team for 30 seconds, and every point of her Forte consumed by her basic attacks increases the damage multiplier of this ability. She'll also consume all of her remaining Forte on hit, ending Chainsaw mode. That's a pretty lengthy kit, but don't worry, there's more. Chisa also applies a variety of defense-reducing buffs with her Forte. The first method is Unseen Snare. Chisa marks enemies by using a resonance skill, hitting enemies after transforming into Chainsaw mode, hitting enemies with her enhanced dodge counter, or simply locking onto targets. When these marked targets take damage, Chisa applies a stack of Havoc Bane to them that reduces their defense by 2% per stack once every 2 seconds. Her second buff is through Thread of Bane. Resonators with this buff ignore 18% of a marked target's defense. These buffs by themselves are nice, but they're just for her. However, Chisa's outro skill makes these abilities shine. This outro grants all of her teammates Resonance Thread of Closure for 20 seconds. In this state, attacks increase the upper stack limit of all negative statuses by 3 for 15 seconds and also grants Threat of Bane, or that 18% defense ignore, to all those that inflict negative statuses or deal negative status damage. This makes her total damage buffs consists of 12% defense reduction on the enemy and 18% defense ignore on her teammates. When you factor in Chisa's kit, resources, and interactions with each other, she has a simple playstyle that focuses on building up her forte with her normal attacks and resonance skill before capping it out with her liberation and then using her enhanced resonance skill to enter chainsaw mode and use her sawing attacks until her forte is fully consumed. She'll then end her combo with eradication and then outro skill to a teammate, increasing the negative status stack limit by 3 and also giving her teammates access to her 18% defense ignore buff. Keep in mind that only teammates who have negative statuses in their kit will be able to fully leverage these buffs. But that's not all. Chisa also has some exploration mechanics built into her kit. Life Thread is a unique resource that allows Chisa to glide by dodging in the middle of her heavy attack, rending lunge, resonance skill, thread withdrawn, or as a recovery from getting hit in the air. She'll ride on her weapon and pull in nearby targets and consume Life Thread. She regenerates this resource over time and has it fully restored after defeating an enemy or exiting chainsaw mode. Using this glide also disables her passive regen on Life Thread for a few seconds. When in chainsaw mode, Life Thread is replaced with Chainsaw Fever, and when Chisa doesn't deal any damage in this state, it'll rapidly deplete in burnout mode. She can exit this state by dealing damage, using her liberation, or her intro skill. These mechanics don't really have any practical use cases in endgame content, but are neat for exploration purposes. When it comes to her inherent skills, her first refreshes her resonance skill if marked enemies are defeated. Her second causes her intro skill and liberation to grant her a 20% havoc damage and healing bonus for 12 seconds. And when her teammates with Threat of Bane defeat a marked target, Chisa gains a buff that marks every target her team damages for 3 seconds, making her great in multi-wave content. Chisa's a character with a ton of built-in utility, sustain, and damage buffs that allow her to shine in specifically negative status focused lineups, focusing almost entirely on defense reduction or ignore. With none of her buffs targeting any teammate in particular, she serves a role very similar to Shorekeeper in how she buffs damage across her team and easily replaces the sustain role in many negative status lineups. However, this does make her use cases outside of negative status teams almost non-existent, as there will be better overall damage buffers like Shorekeeper that will make her role a bit redundant. When it comes to actually building Chisa, starting off with her skill priority, you'll want to max out her Forte circuit as it's the main source of her damage. Then you'll max out her Liberation, Resonance skill, and then her basic attack with the option to leave her intro skill at a lower level to conserve resources like boss mats. Now let's talk about Chisa's weapons, and it's clear she has a lot of competitive and accessible options on the Broadblade roster. Here's what the calculations are looking like using Lustrous Razor as a baseline. Credits to Pride One. Let's explain these results, starting off with her signature, Kumo Kiri. This weapon has 500 base attack, 36% crit rate, and a 12% attack buff for its base stats. And when the wielder uses an intro skill or inflicts a negative status, they gain an 8% liberation damage bonus that stacks up to 3 times for 15 seconds. And at max stacks, when teammates inflict a negative status, they gain 24% attribute damage bonus for 15 seconds. This weapon is easily stackable with Chisa's kit and greatly amplifies her ability to support negative status teams. A perfect fit. The next best option is another limited 5-star, Wildfire Mark. This weapon has a higher base attack and lower crit damage, 12% attack, while also granting a 24% liberation damage bonus for 6 seconds after an intro or liberation is used that can be extended for 4 seconds after dealing heavy attack damage. This extension grants a 24% fusion damage bonus to the team for 30 seconds. This weapon buffs Chisa's damage but isolates its buffs to fusion-only teams, and unfortunately, Fusion Burst, the negative status effect, isn't in the game yet. However, it works great as a stat stick. The third best option is none other than the standard Broadblade. This weapon gives Chisa a standard base attack main stat, and ER alongside a stacking liberation damage buff whenever a skill is used. Chisa has 2 resonance skill casts in her standard rotation, giving her a sizable buff while also granting her ER, which is very important for her uptime. A solid choice that's very affordable. When it comes to 4-star options, none of the existing choices work very well with Chisa other than the Renacida Craftable, which grants a stacking attack buff every time the wielder damages an enemy with a negative status, which is very easy to do with Chisa on the team. However, its poor scaling makes it fall behind relative to the standard Broadblade, so it might be better to simply save up for the standard one instead of this. Now it's time to talk about Chisa's Echoes, and it's clear she has a best in slot with a 3-piece Thread of Severed Fate, which grants a 20% attack and 30% liberation damage bonus for 5 seconds after inflicting Havoc Bane. She has permanent uptime on this. You'll combine this with a 2-piece Havoc set or 2-piece ER set from Havoc Eclipse, Midnight Veil, Moonlit Clouds, or or Empyrine Anthem. You can also opt to run a 5-piece Rejuvenating Glow set instead if you're supporting Spectral Frazzle teams to buff their attack. When it comes to her Echo main stats, she'll have identical requirements across both sets. You'll want a crit 4 cost, 2 havoc damage 3 costs, and 2 attack 1 costs. When it comes to substats, you'll prioritize ER up to 130%, crit rate, damage, attack percentage, and liberation damage rolls. Chisa unfortunately doesn't really benefit from other rolls as she deals very little damage outside of her liberation buff state. The last area of investment when it comes to Chisa involves your wallet or a lot of saved Astrite. It's her sequence nodes. Big thanks to Pridewin for calculating the damage increase per node. Her first node grants her interruption resistance in chainsaw mode and also grants her a 30% attack buff when marking targets. This mark will also deal a fixed 62k to each marked target and can't reduce them below 62% HP. It's affected by no damage bonuses either. Her second node causes her to ignore 10% of the target's havoc resistance when dealing damage and grants every teammate with Threat of Bane a whopping 50% attribute damage buff. Her third node grants a 120% damage multiplier to all of her chainsaw mode attacks that can be stacked with the buff from her liberation. The vibration strength reduction of these attacks is also increased by 50%. This is the Chisa main DPS sequence node. Her fourth node halves the cooldown on her marked target Havoc Bane application from 2 seconds to 1. The fifth node gives her liberation a 100% damage bonus when used and halves the life thread cost for gliding. And her sixth node, the big one, gives her knockout immunity during chainsaw mode, allowing her to survive with 1 HP, and it also upgrades her mark to cause enemies to take 40% additional damage from Chisa and 30% amplified damage from negative statuses. Now that we've covered Chisa's build, let's get into some of her optimal teams and rotations. Unfortunately, as a primarily negative status buffer, Chisa simply does not have a lot of teams on release, but we know that we still got 3 negative statuses left, and she's likely to have many more relatively soon. This means that her best partners on release will be Cartethyia, Ciaccona, Zani, and Phoebe. Our first team is Chisa's best, featuring her as the sustain, Ciaccona as the sub DPS, and Cartethyia as the main DPS. You'll start on Chisa and use her skill, following up with Rending Lunge. Then you'll use her Liberation, her second basic attack, and then Rending Lunge followed by a fully charged Death Snip. From there, you'll enhance skill to enter Chainsaw mode and then trigger her second basic and then third basic. You'll then automatically use Fall Tone and then Eradication followed by her Echo skill and then outro to Ciaccona. Ciaccona will then basic until she gains her second Forte charge and then jump attack for her third. Afterwards, you'll skill, Forte heavy attack, and then Echo skill alongside her Liberation. Then you'll intro to Cartethyia, attack until you have her second sword, and then skill, plunge, and then Liberation. As Fleur-de-Lis, you'll skill, then attack twice in the air, and then skill again to plunge, and then perform a full basic attack chain, and then her heavy attack and follow-up before liberating to end the rotation. When you intro skill on Chisa, you can skip the cast of her Resonance skill and simply basic attack, Rending Lunge, and then Death Snip into an ultimate with another Chainsaw mode rotation for her second rotation. This team performs better with Arrow Rover with their weapon, only if Chisa has her own signature. In our next two teams, Chisa isn't the best overall option, but she still gets the job done. We'll start off with Chisa as the sustain, Phoebe as the sub DPS, and Zani as the DPS. You'll perform the same opener rotation from the previous rotation, but then intro skill onto Phoebe instead of Ciaccona. Phoebe will then hold down her skill to enter Confession mode, Liberation, and then skill again and perform a basic attack chain into a heavy attack 2 times before echo skilling and then outroing to Zani. Zani will then skill, basic attack to fill up her Forte, and then enhance skill to apply her self buffs before using her Liberation. From here, you'll perform a full Nightfall basic attack chain and then hold down her skill to trigger a second. You'll then perform a third Nightfall attack chain before using her second Liberation and then outro skilling back to Chisa. In this team, Shorekeeper or Spectral Rover actually outperform Chisa, but she's still competitive in this lineup, especially important if those two characters are getting used in other teams. In the next team, we'll substitute Phoebe for the main DPS and Spectral Rover for the sub DPS. You'll again perform the same opening rotation on Chisa and then outro skill to Spectral Rover, who will then immediately enhance skill, follow-up basic, and then Liberation. Then they'll use 2 full heavy attacks to fill up their Forte, and then enhance skill again before outro skilling to Phoebe. Phoebe will then heavy attack to enter Absolution mode, Liberation, and then skill. She'll then perform 3 basic attacks and then heavy attack 4 times in a row, and then outro skill to Chisa after all of them are done. In this team, Chisa once again falls behind Shorekeeper, but she still serves as a fantastic option if units like that are busy in other lineups. When it comes to quick swap teams, Chisa doesn't really have any mechanics that work against swapping, but she has very poor damage outside of her enhanced liberation state, making swapping with her a bit questionable at S0. However, since this is an early guide, further optimizations may come out in the future, so be on the lookout. Now that we've covered Chisa's team rotations, let's talk about hers, and she has 2 rotations depending on if she's starting the team's rotation or continuing it. Let's begin with the opener. Chisa will Resonant Skill and then follow up with Rending Lunge, canceling the end animation with her liberation. From there, she'll Basic 2 and then Rending Lunge again, and then fully charge a Death Snip attack before canceling that ending animation with her enhanced skill. Then she'll simply perform a full Saw Ring attack chain, going from Basic Attack 2 to Basic Attack 3 to Fall Tone, and then use Eradication, swapping mid-animation to Outro Skill to her teammate. From there, you'll perform the team's rotation and then Outro Skill back to Chisa. In the second rotation, you'll Basic 2 after her intro, Rending Lunge, and then fully charge a Death Snip and then Liberation, following this with another full Saw Ring attack chain and Outro Skill to a teammate. Chisa's second rotation is a little bit faster than her first, but she still sits comfortably at around 8 to 9 seconds when performed optimally. At the end of the day, Chisa possesses a strong kit and a ton of potential for the future, but simply does not shine as a true best-in-slot across any team during her initial release, other than the Aero Erosion lineup, provided she either has her signature or her S2. Unfortunately, her performance in the Spectral Frazzle lineups falls behind existing options, making her pull value very questionable on her release. However, what's clear is that Kuro Games is clearly looking to flesh out the rest of the negative statuses far more into the future, and Chisa's ability to support these archetypes looks absolutely insane. What this means is that her value will likely increase dramatically on her, well, reruns, and she's likely to run alongside these newer units that have these mechanics. Her playstyle is fun, unique, and nuanced, but I cannot say that she is anything close to a must-pull given the existing roster in the game. But in the future, she likely will be. As always, if you enjoyed this content, please hit that like and subscribe button. Peace out.